yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
And so these are some of the things that they found in that dig. And the reason they were buried away is because obviously the Harrises wouldn't have had a garbage disposal system like us. So their way of getting rid of it that they didn't want. So these are some of the things that they found. We just had them laid out so you can see some of the parts of the collections we have now. It was funny because they had, you know, they had like assistants to kind of read through all of the submissions that were sent to the contest. And one of the assistants was like, oh, this is trash, it's not a good book. But the actual editor was like, no, let me take a look. And he liked it so much, it ended up winning first prize. So because of the fact that it won, it became a really big hit. And everybody started to pick it up and read it. So how is that related to the Harrises? Well, Mazo in her book talks about this family. This is where they would have had their meals, and of course they wouldn't have been preparing it themselves. They had a domestic worker during the war time. Her name is Carrie, and she lived here for about a couple of years. We're going to visit Carrie's room in a few minutes, and I'll talk more about her. But she would have been doing all of the cooking, the cleaning, the tending to the children, the washing, the sewing. She basically did everything. And she was young. She was maybe about 12 or 13 years old while she was with the family, so she was quite young. So big responsibility for such a young person. Yeah, I mean, we have to give credit to her because really the running of the household would not have happened without her. A lot of the times we look at the people who had all of the money and the status, right, and we ooh and ah at all of their things, but in reality it was the domestic workers who were doing a lot of 95% of the work, really, right? So we have to acknowledge them too. This gentleman here, this is James McGrath. So I mentioned Arthur's wife, Mary. She was a McGrath, so this is her grandfather. I don't know if you're familiar with Mississauga, but there's a church on Dundas and Mississauga Road. It's kind of up on a hill, Arundel. So he was actually the rector of that Anglican church, yeah. So she also came from a pretty big, renowned family in Mississauga. And she came into a lot of money when her father passed away, about $50,000, which is a lot of money for that time. Yeah, so a lot of things in the house, yes, they belonged to the Harrises, but they also came from the McGraths. So this sideboard here, she brought in her with her during her marriage. The marble fireplace. Story about this, the way it's positioned. Sometimes a lot of the kids would sit on the side of the table, so it's almost like he's watching them, keep them in line. So a lot of the kids were always a little bit scared to sit on that side. They were like, oh, because he has his eye on them, yeah. And then we have a story from Barbara, who is Arthur's granddaughter, and she talked about this bowl. She said that, oh, my grandmother Mary never let me touch it because it was always full of candy, but she didn't want it to break. She was afraid that, you know, if the kids touched it, it would shatter. Yeah, so she actually already has a crack in it. It looks like it's been put back together.
It's kind of cute and would look very delicate.
Right. So Barbara always talks. She's like, I always wanted to put my hands in the candy jar, but my grandmother was always watching, so she was a bit shy to do that. He was a pretty well-decorated military man, as you can tell by his lovely uniform. He actually served in the Battle of Waterloo, so he was quite, you know, like I said, had a pretty successful military career. He never came, that's him right there. And this is our main man, Arthur, who were cigarettes, cigars, and you know, to drink. And it was gifted to Geoffrey on his first birthday. And then his mom Annie kind of sewed him back up. And on his first 50th, because obviously within 50 years he probably got a bit ragged, and so he was sewn back up and given to him on his 50th birthday.
What's that?
Yeah, we actually do a Black History tour, and one of the families we talked about, they were Black settler families, and we talked about some of the things they grew. So this is heritage corn. So corn doesn't look like this anymore because it's been genetically modified, but this is the way corn used to look. We mentioned cigars and cigarettes. This actually here is a cigarette case. So they would have had like little cigarettes rolled in there.
Oh, that's the knife?
Yeah, so this is actually from Ypres, from the Battle of Ypres in the First World War. So the son-in-law was, he never really saw active battle, but his brother did, Edgerton. So Annie's brother-in-law. I'm actually not quite sure if it actually belonged to him, but it is from the battle. And then we have a couple of pens here, and then this like, what's it called, a letter opener. But any ideas as to what this might be? This long white one.
I think I kind of letter opener or I
Yeah,
don't
it looks
know,
like that, but it's a little
sorting.
long, right?
Yeah,
so
it's
it's
too
interesting
long.
because it's actually a page turner. So back then, newspapers, when they were printed, the ink was still a bit wet.
Right.
And of course, you know, they wouldn't want their fingers to get blackened by the ink, and so they would use something like this to turn the
I
pages.
know.
So cool, that's not.
They can go upstairs.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Oh, do they?
It's a stove, right?
Yeah, so it's actually not a stove, it's actually used for heating. So before I talk about this, an important thing to mention is that in 1913, it was a really big year for the house. They get the telephone put in, they get running water put in upstairs, they get these central heating radiators put in. So the family, before the war starts, is using these radiators, but they require coal. And then when the war starts, a lot of the coal was rationed off to give to the people in Europe because they needed it more there. And of course, the Harrises were loyal to their country, and they had a son-in-law who was already enlisted in the army in the war. And so in order to show their patriotism, they stopped using coal to fire these guys up. So instead, they got this thing put in, which is a wood stove. And instead of using coal, it uses wood. So they would put wood in it, and then the heat would rise. They had a lot of money that they got from family back in Scotland. Yeah. And because we talk about one of the Ross family, and that's actually their family picture. That's pretty simple. She has a little sewing machine, not a very extravagant one, a very simple one, because she would have been responsible for fixing some of the in Ottawa. And I'm going to be sent abroad, you know, in a couple of days. Can you come and meet me? I'm not sure if they ended up meeting, but Ernest ended up dying in the war.
So, for example, they would have known like where the other one was, like once they were shipped out.
Usually no, because sometimes it just depended. Sometimes you did, sometimes you didn't. I'm not sure how they managed to keep that connection.
But I'm thinking like they wouldn't have a record of saying, like, you know, Mary went to this house, Ernest went to
Maybe, yeah, they might have. But I mean, how likely is it that they would have had access to that, right? Like that was really just official records for the. This thing you put, you know, you heat it up, and then you have like the oven here, and you have food in here. These stove tops get hot too, obviously, so you can have things going here. And then if Carrie wanted to keep something warm, this is a little warmer, so she would have just tucked it in there. She was probably doing 10 things at once, so she didn't want the food to get cold, so she might have put it in here. Also very much the same. But there's some really interesting things in here. We usually make these favorite cookies. But there's some, this was like a book. Scones. Right, so there's one last little place, and then you would wring the clothes out to get all the water out, then you would dry it. And then just behind you there are some irons. They're really heavy. Actually, you can feel one of them if you're interested. They're quite heavy. So these little thing around, and it would knead the dough for you.
Like a dough machine.
Yeah.
In the
Exactly. Very expensive. So on a regular basis, I mean, they would have taken the sugar out when they had like very fancy guests over, but on a regular basis, they would have been using maple sugar. And that's, maple sugar is one of the, because it doesn't have a compressor. So that top thing is open, they would have filled it with ice. And then, so it's like you have to like kind of flick a piece and try to get it into, so you have to basically flick that and try to get it into the hole.
Oh, really?
My dad, he was like,
Or a long line of military people and their
with the
family.
cannon.
Yeah, so the boys might have been expected to play like little Jeffrey, who had the goose. Girls might have been expected to play with like dolls and
tea
and
party.
the tea, exactly, the tea set. So actually, there's a really sweet story behind this dollhouse. So Naomi, the sister who didn't marry, when she was a little girl, maybe about 7 or 8, she wrote a letter to Santa, and she was basically in the letter asking for furnishings for a dollhouse. So she didn't have the dollhouse yet. So she's also implying that she wants a dollhouse.
Right.
So of course Arthur, you know, finds this letter and he, you know, builds this dollhouse himself, which is why it looks a little crude. But I mean, it was not bad. It was a pretty okay handyman. And then the girls ended up getting, you know, what they wanted for Christmas. So here's the letter. I'll read it because it's really sweet. My dear Mr. Santa Claus, I am in hopes of having a house built next summer for my sister and me to play in. And I would either like things to furnish the house with, or else money to buy things for the house. I will tell you the size of the house, I mean the size I would like to have. I don't know whether my papa will build me as large as the one I would like, but I think about 12 feet square and about 8 feet high. But of course, I do not want to be greedy. But if you will give us a few things, my sister and I can manage to get the rest. Hoping this is not too much to ask you for. I remain your ever sincere little friend, Naomi M. Harris.
Oh wow,
So
so
really
the dimensions too.
Yeah, so it's really sweet, you know, that she's like such a...
I didn't heard any kids give dimensions.
I know.
They just need the doll.
She obviously had this idea of what she wanted, right? The other thing, interesting thing, are these little skates here that are quite heavy. You wouldn't really want to put those on.
Oh, it's a
today.
metal one, right?
Yeah, so they're made of metal. You would have put your shoe essentially in it. And then again, another elephant in the room. What's this owl doing behind? Finished getting dressed in the morning because it was so cold in the house. And she remembers like, oh, they would kind of like throw their clothes onto this little couch here. This is actually the one that she's sitting on, Mary, downstairs in the picture, painting from Annie's wedding day. Yeah, so that's that. Married to Beverly, and she moves to a little house that her parents gave her for her wedding. That's actually also on their property. That house actually still exists today. It's just on just a little bit further south on Clarkson. But it's been occupied by like modern day residents also. So then after Annie moves out, this gets turned into a guest room. Annie does come back and stay with her family because she and her husband get divorced at one point. So Annie comes back and forth a lot. So this is one of the nicest rooms in the house, and this is the one that they gave to guests because they wanted to make sure that, you know, like how you kept your guests was a reflection on yourself, right? And of course, back in the day, you wouldn't have had guests coming for a weekend, right? You might have had guests coming for a pretty long stay, especially if they've done like a 10 to 14 day steamer journey across the Atlantic from England, right? Because you want to make sure they have the nicest room in the house. It's also the warmest room because we have this pipe coming through it. And then an interesting story about it. In 1918, Annie's daughter, Dora, contracts Spanish flu. Because Spanish flu was going around at the time, a lot of people died from it, yeah. So she contracts it, and she, thankfully, she makes it. But one of the nights, she's incredibly sick. She's probably in a very feverish state. And she wakes up crying, saying that, oh, I saw a figure of a woman with long hair. And everyone's like, who is this woman she's talking about? What we think might have happened, actually, if you stand right on this side and you look up at the wood grain on the headboard of the bed, you can actually make out almost like a little image of a woman. So it's possible that she woke up and then in her sort of fevered state was delirious and then saw that and said, oh, I saw a woman.
It just looked like that, yeah, you can see the eyes.
The eyes.
It's like a 3D and it's like a little
Yeah, it's really interesting, yeah.
Yeah, there's a word for it when you see faces in
I know,
objects.
yeah, I don't know what it is.
No, it's another word. I
Yeah.
can't remember, but I know there's one word for it.
Yeah, so we think that that's what might have happened. Because we don't want to believe that there's a lady with long hair in this house. We don't want
Yeah,
that.
that one was cute.
Yeah.
So that's the,
don't have any toilet in there.
Oh,
So they
okay.
just had a room, kind of,
Right.
just a plain room.
Dixie. So if you're familiar with Dixie Road in Mississauga, it was
yeah.
actually named after Dr. Dixie.
oh.
So Dr. Dixie was like kind of like office on like this part is
Right.
painted, the other part is a different color.
Oh, yes.
So we were pretty sure that they didn't open it up. Yeah.
Separate.
And then the last thing is this document box. So I had said earlier that the house caught fire. So they had lost a lot of their homes, paperwork, their important documents in that fire because they didn't have them in a safe place. So Arthur then started to keep, actually his father, Sir James, started to keep everything in a document box by the foot of the bed. And then it's something you can just grab and either throw it out the window quickly or run down with it, you know? So then Arthur sort of held on to that tradition and did that too. And then you notice Carrie's sewing machine was a small one. This one's like a proper nice singer sewing machine, yeah.
Yeah, my mom had the same one.
Yeah, she's
With
telling
the-
me, yeah. Yeah, so that's like a nice fancy one. This here is a portrait of Naomi, and her hair looks a bit weird in the portrait, but I think it's because apparently she was wearing a hat in the painting, and then she didn't like it, so she had the artist remove the hat, and so that's why her hair looks a little
Yeah, it's like
bizarre.
more.
Yeah.
What is this?
So yeah, I'm going to talk about this too. So this actually is a steamer chest. So this is Arthur's sisters Lucy and Bessie. They did like a big trip to England. It was like quite common for young girls, like around their early 20s, like late teens, to go and to England and do shopping and just kind of like explore and go on a bit of an adventure. So this actually belonged to Lucy, one of the Harris sisters. So that's why it's initialed LLH. Yeah, Lucy Letitia Harris. But it was passed down to Naomi, and Naomi and Annie, I think, also did their own sort of continental trip. And so this, again, is the rounded curve of this steamer trunk is an indication of their status and wealth. Because it's rounded, you can't put anything on top of it. So the Harris girls would have been the last ones to board the ship, and they would have been the first ones to come off. Right? So that's, again, like they were traveling first class, essentially. Yeah, and then there's like a little writing desk here because Naomi took care of a lot of her parents' correspondences. And then speaking of letters, she actually also received a lot of letters from men who were interested in marrying her, but she just never said yes to anyone. Yeah, we just don't know why. Personal choice, I guess, right?
Yeah.
There's a dog there.
1781, the Mississauga and the British Crown started signing a series of treaties which allowed for Empire loyalists to settle in this area. That includes the Bradley family themselves. So Lewis Bradley was granted 200 acres of land in 1810. And that land stretched from Lake Ontario to near modern-day Lakeshore Road. After which Lewis Bradley passed away, and so they sold their property. And over the course of the years, the Bradley House was used for personal property, later as a guest cabin, sort of. And in the 1940s, this southern portion of the property was sold to the British American Oil Company, now Petro-Canada. I think Petro-Canada is there. And the oil company was going to move to this location.
Oh.
This house was owned by a man named James Skinner, who was in the British Navy. And essentially it's from the same time period, like I think it's from the 1850s, but inside it wasn't kept to the time period, so instead they continued to keep it in its modern interior and use as the opposite entrances. The family were farmers, so on their 200-acre land that's related. So they grew a lot of different crops, and they also kept animals like sheep and cows. So after the Bradleys sold the property, I believe they sold it to Elizabeth Bradley's brother-in-law, and it remained in that family different generations. And then in the 1940s, when property was sold to the British American Oil Company, it became their property. And Kenneth Armstrong bought the house and then handed it over to the Toronto Township Historical Society. A collection of different transportation vehicles. So here we have the buggy. This would have been your horse-drawn carriage. 1830, and it was sort of this left half of the house was built first, and then in 1840 they had added on this section. It was built. It was located on Lake Ontario, like the coast more, so they didn't have to use a well. Instead, they had the kids collect. Obviously, because it's so much work to collect the water, and then they would have to heat it on the stove. So you're going to use as little water as you need to in order to bathe yourself. And so for little kids, they might fit in the little circle there, but for everyone else, they would probably be sitting on the side and just sort of like sponge bath kind of thing, or like washcloth bath. Yeah. Some other items we have here. So we have these clothing irons, which are fully iron, not like today's.
Oh, yeah.
And essentially, you would have like 2 or 3 of them here on the stove, and then as they started to heat, they had to make themselves, including candles. So we have here an example of a candle mold. So candles at the time would have been used by made with animal fat, which they would have gotten from their own animals. Burned them and kept the wax, and so they could reuse it again. It could attract critters, and so you keep the candles in here, and then close it up to sort of keep any of the little mice or critters at bay.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Area where they would have done all of the cooking. So it would have again been Elizabeth Bradley, the wife's responsibility to do most of the cooking along with some of the children. But it would have been the responsibility of the kids taking turns in order to keep the fire going. Because at the time, you weren't using matches or anything like that, so what you were using in order to start a fire is flint and steel. The Bradley family having to be very self-sufficient. One of the things that they would have learned from the Indigenous peoples living here we have here an example of the white refined sugar, but this was very expensive. And I have this, we had a Black History tour here earlier, so that's where made on plantations in the southern US and the Caribbean. And then it was exported to Britain and then imported to Canada. Because it was the enslaved workers. They wouldn't often have white sugar. It would be like considered a really special treat. Wouldn't have used it. It would have been more of like if they had like guests coming over kind of thing. So for the most part, they would have used more like maple sugar in there. Of items that would have been used in the 1800s. So we actually use this stuff for our programming. So we do like, for example, we do overnight camps for the scouts. And you could adjust how hot you wanted the pan by how low you wanted. So here, for example, we have a griddle. So this would have been, they would have baked like biscuits on it. The program when we make like bannock and stuff like that.
Oh, those are good.
Yeah, and we do it because everybody has like a different way of doing it. And
Yeah.
one of the interpreters, she like adds like a lot more of the maple sugar in it, so it's like nice and sweet.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that's okay. The wind blew the shutters. So here we have a Dutch oven. So this would have been, you know, for like different like pies and stuff like that would have been placed inside. And how they would have cooked with it is they would have placed it close to the hearth, and then they would have actually had like coal or pieces of wood. This would have been the area where like they did like their sewing and stuff, or just sort of like any of the tasks they needed to do from the, you know, indoors for the farm, stuff like that. This also would have been the area where they entertained guests that were over. So for example, they would have had like the traveling ministers, because this was a Methodist family. The home, a couple of families would have been invited over and they would have listened to the sermon, that sort of thing. Yes, over here we have, I always like to point out this item, I think it's, we had maybe like, you know, their work clothes, their day. Yeah, another thing over here, so when the clothes became too threadbare to the, where the rags are essentially like weaved through the strands here, and then when it continues to go along until it creates like a, you know, like with this width, probably like a table runner or something like that. It would have also been, yeah, what I've used it for. So, as sort of like a pre-wrapping paper is at Christmas time. You could use it as sort of like a wrapping around a gift.
I've been thinking of the way that you look like somebody that I need like all the time. Girl, I need you in my life. I look at your pretty face and I